Second, this is not the path to economic prosperity. This is destruction. It's destructivism.
Well, and you can see, too, that with the whole public choice theory type thing, like Robert Higgs was pointing out on the show last week, that as the society is more and more impoverished by the wars, then businessmen have fewer and fewer opportunities to make their money, so they turn more and more to the state and to corrupt crony capitalism and to Pentagon contracts. And so if you're into mining or whatever, well, geez, maybe the best opportunity I have in this society now is to go ahead and steal minerals from Afghanistan. So maybe I need the Marines to help me secure my resources over there. And we just get poorer and poorer as the economics of the situation are all, it's like an equation for self-destruction, basically, for bankruptcy.
Well, it's true, and we're seeing, as Professor Higgs has pointed out, we're seeing right now the same sort of regime uncertainty that took place in the 30s when businessmen didn't want to invest. They didn't trust what the government in Washington would do. They didn't trust that the government wouldn't just seize all their property. And
right, but they can trust the generals if they can make friends with a general and get a good contract. Now there's a relationship worth having.
Well, it's like, Boeing and Martin Marietta and Lockheed and all these various companies that, they all do very well off murdering people. They're a great bunch.
So if I understand this business cycle thing right then, so they want to launch a war. They're in the middle of the recession from the last time they did this thing. So they inflate all the currency. And that creates bubbles of basically price inflation in certain markets, like we saw in fuel, in food costs, in housing, etc., during the Bush years. Then comes the big crash. Then instead of them letting there be the correction, then they stimulate more and they inflate more in order to keep the whole thing going again. And I guess if I understand most of you Austrian theory guys right, the game is up, basically. We're at the point where it's not going to work anymore, I think, as Ron Paul said on the show the other day, because the dollar is going to lose its standing as the reserve currency of the world. And so what that'll mean is we'll have massive price inflation across the board in everything, and our economy will be destroyed, and we'll have to basically, start all over again.
Well, Robert Higgs has written about this as well, but it took 17 years to get out of the Great Depression of Hoover and Roosevelt, and it wasn't until after World War II, and part of the reason that it took so long, in fact, the entire reason it took so long, was because the government was doing everything wrong, whether it's running horrible wars or having all kinds of welfare programs, crushing entrepreneurs, and sort of all the various things they did. It just took a very long time to get out of this. Today we have a government that makes Franklin Roosevelt's look like, Thomas Jefferson's. I mean, we've never had a government anything like the size of the U.S. government or its power in the history of the world. This is by far the biggest government ever to exist. And therefore it's able to do far more damage. It has far more resources at its disposal. It can do more damage to us. It can do more damage to the world. And they're in the process of making this second Great Depression last a very, very long time. A key thing to keep in mind when thinking about this sort of thing is that the damage is done during the boom. That's sort of counterintuitive because we think of during the boom, hey, we're all having a great time, it's a party, and wonderful, live it up, and so forth. But that's when the malinvestments are made. That's when the investments that should be going into things that are going to produce more prosperity for everyone, the businessmen who are doing it especially, but everybody in society too, when those things are not happening, but money and resources are being put into things that are actually economic disasters. And it's only in the recession or the depression where the good things happen, that is, these bad investments are liquidated. However, the government does everything possible under Keynesian doctrine to prevent the liquidation from taking place, and therefore they keep the depression going. So, we're in a brand new situation because of the size of the government, the size of the empire. But my guess is, yes, it's all coming to an end because they're not going to be able to continue to fund the empire. They're not going to be able to, because the dollar is going to be in big trouble internationally, exactly as Ron Paul says. And we're in new waters. I'm sorry to say, and not very happy waters.
All right. Well, now I'm going to ask your forgiveness first, and then I'm going to talk like a commie for a minute here. is something actually that sort of crystallized in my mind a little bit reading a Gary North article on LewRockwell.com the other day where he was saying it's just the iron law of oligarchy or the iron law of something or other where 20% always control 80% and, the property and the wealth, and that then you have the 1/2 of the 1% who control most of that, and et cetera like that. And I was thinking that it's all their fault. I mean, here's a country, 300 million people, most of whom work for a living and make far less than $100,000 a year. And you have these few people who control billions, who, of course, in the words of Dick Durbin, own the U.S. Senate as their own private property, and which of course has the power to tax all of us and bail them out endlessly. And it seems to me that every single billionaire in this society is a communist, is a giant welfare cheating scam artist, and has the ability at least to attempt to try to stop the empire if they're and are failing to do that if they're not the ones promoting and pushing the empire, to the nth degree. Like even the Walton family, we all pay for their security on the high seas as they import all their goods from China. They don't have to pay for their own security. They're all welfare cheats. So why shouldn't the 80% of us rise up, find these billionaires, and lynch them? I mean, they're destroying our society, Lew.
Well, I don't, first of all,
eat the rich.
I don't think that that sort of violence is a good thing. That's the state's tool. Violence, killing, as Mises said, beating, hanging, killing. That's what the state does. That's, we should be better than that. But I would also argue that the rich in a free society, and even in our partially free society today, most of rich people are very much a benefit to society because they make the investments and do the savings, create the jobs, start the businesses that benefit all of us. Then it's just a property rights question. If you have earned your money through serving the consumers, and I would say that take something like Walmart, yes, they're in a statist society, so they're driving their trucks over, government roads and all these other things. But still, Walmart has been a huge benefit to society, and the Walton family deserves the billions that they've earned from it. So I think that's I think it's a very different situation.
Don't the Waltons owe you and me the future where they spend their billions that they use on political influence, which they do, to demand an end to the empire when it's destroying our society for all the rest of us, when we all know that the Waltons have the billions, therefore the power, and we don't. And they're basically, at the very least, they're silent as this all continues on. And it's got to be hurting them too. They're brand USA.
Well, here's something to consider. If you're in business, there is a certain amount of political spending you may want to do just as self-protection, not trying to take advantage of your competitors, not trying to tax the people, not trying to get illegitimate privileges and so forth. But just as I don't recommend this, by the way, but I can sort of understand how some business people who maybe don't have your ideological sophistication think that that's the way to proceed. But you're right. Most of the political spending is, of course, is predatory. Just like the entire political system is predatory, the entire government is predatory, and so to the extent that private people participate in that, they shouldn't. On the other hand, it's a little bit. Can we use the post office? Can we? I'm certainly not for anybody sending their child to a public school. I think it's a terrible thing to do to a child. But can you actually say that somebody is acting immorally in an economic sense by sending their child to a public school because it's, quote unquote, free? I mean, I think not. I mean, I always like Walter Block's distinction that if you're involved in promoting these kinds of things, if you are in any sense helping bring them about, strengthening them, defending them, and even with letters to the editor, let alone anything more than that, then you absolutely should be not getting one dime. But if you're just a regular guy and you're sort of stuck in the system, it seems to me it's tough to blame them, and I think it's much better to appeal to their better natures. And it is actually possible to overcome people's narrow, immediate economic self-interest in these terms, and by appealing to their sense of justice. And that's what that's a great weapon that libertarians have against the system. We can appeal to people's sense of right and wrong and teach them about right and wrong. And, you know, we are building for the distant future, not because we think that we're going to make everything just fine when the Republicans get in November, or, you know, that kind of stuff, but because we're building for the future. We care about future generations. We want a better society, a more decent society, a non-killer society, a non-theft society. So we have the right ideas. We have the persuasive ideas. We have the right economics. We have the right sense of history. We have the right power elite analysis, what you were talking about understanding who's doing what to whom through the government. So we have the tools. I hate to use that word since that now means, you know, bombs and torture and so forth. But we have the tools, and, you know, I think we have to keep our eye on the future. It's not easy because we're going to be facing some very tough times, and that's why, by the way, the first and most important thing to do, take care of yourself and your family. You know, don't spend unnecessarily. Don't borrow. Have a little bit of gold. Maybe have some food in storage. I mean, just really prepare for the worst. We can all hope and certainly pray that the worst doesn't come, and maybe the worst won't come, and maybe there's no chance the worst will come. But if you're prudent, if you care about, you know, yourself and your family in terms of protecting yourself, then you'll have the energy and the economic wherewithal and the mental ability and so forth to try to help others and to promote these kinds of ideas and to hope for a better future.
Well, you know, I think a lot of what you said there is a real reason why people are so attracted to the message of LewRockwell.com. And I think that's frankly because most people are under the understanding that libertarianism just kind of means the rich white man's anarchy, and, you know, where corporate America can just do whatever they want, and that, you know, even an ideologue like me or you, that really we're just the cover for evil corporatism and whatever. And I think it's so important that people hear the way you put, you know, the way you said, for example, you know, an average guy trying to make it in the world, of course he needs government help to go to college. They're the ones who raise the prices already. That's the system he lives in. He's got to work with that. He's got to drive on a government road and use the post office and whatever. But for someone with real means to collect government welfare and to thrive off of government contracts and government inflation, et cetera, that is what must be stopped first. I think that obviously, one, you're right, and then two, because you're so right about that is the best libertarian message for people to hear, that there's no greater enemy of the parasitical rich than the libertarians. We're not against wealth legitimately earned at all. That's our whole philosophy, is everybody has the right to keep what they earn. But it's not okay for someone to spend a couple of $1 million buying a few congressmen and then stealing billions from the rest of us and, you know, sucking us dry.
And, you know, there's another point. Just as if we have a Jeffersonian understanding of so-called states' rights, of competitive sovereignties, we understand that we can restrict the federal government, not because we think there's anything good happening in Sacramento or Montgomery or Boston or with the other state capitals, but that Jefferson was right that you can restrict the central government, which is the real enemy, not only of us internally, but of the people of the world, by having this divided sovereignty. So it is a very good thing just to have more and more powerful rich people. It's why the state, for example, one of the reasons they wanted to enact the income tax and the inheritance tax, because when you have very, very wealthy, powerful private families, they represent competition with the state, and they represent separate power centers in society. So the state wants only a power center for itself, and everybody else, as Robert Nesbitt, the great libertarian sociologist, said, wants everybody naked before the state. So they want to get rid of all what he called intermediating institutions, all businesses, charities, towns, states, churches, families. So there's just the naked individual faced with the state. So to the extent, and this is certainly shown throughout history, if you can have very powerful private families, and I'm not talking, we hope they might be libertarians, but it sort of doesn't matter. It's a good thing to have competition to the central government. It's a good thing to have these very powerful families